Very much, JC, and what a great group there is here this morning. And so I've got my notes here, so I'm going to refer to them a little bit. I wanted to thank Bill Haggerty and Zach Nunn for getting people started. I'm going to talk mostly about the economic situation, and one of the themes is the soft power of the United States that has diminished. Before we get into that, there was mention earlier of the deterioration in Africa, and one of the key, it was mentioned the South Sudan situation, but I'll add to that, Chad has pulled away from France. You see the deterioration in the French political climate, and it shows the world searching for direction and challenged by that. These are, the world is truly in a dangerous spot, and so we're looking for ways to have leadership show forward. And so JC nicely mentioned my time with Senator Bill Roth. You may all remember that there was, I'm going to wait for a moment here. Congressman, thank you. Great remarks. So Senator Bill Roth was the founder or one of the original participants in PEC, the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council. So I was there at that time. And the worry at the time was also about whether the U.S. had ample power. One of the issues going on was the cooperation that was going on between Japan and the Soviet Union. So I actually took a trip in 1990 related to the Indo-Pacific cooperation to Khabarovsk and to Nahodka. How many people, has anybody been to Khabarovsk? A big city there's one in Russian, the Soviet Far East, we called it at the time. And Nahodka is the offloading spot for coal going to Asia from Russia, both big economic power centers. And I went to Vladivostok before, as the Berlin Wall was falling. So we can put our memory back into the magnitude of change that's gone on in the world, and we need to face it with a sense of humility as far as what role we can have. But I do think that we need to think in terms of individual leadership. I had the great fortune to work for James Baker as the world was going through changes in those years, and then again for President Trump in the most recent administration. Markets and the private sector, I think, are the clear way that we have to go forward, and unfortunately the world's second biggest power is a communist single party dominated, controlled entity that even still has capital control. So, you know, one of the underpinnings of how we make the world grow faster is through capital flows, and China is not participating in that, and that is a big shortage and setback for the world. I saw their bond yields going down to 2% today in one explit, which, you know, for a country that's claiming to be a developing country, it doesn't make sense, but it shows the cutoff of capital flows from China. And so the issue of how has the U.S. lost its soft power is a long story. It's one that was played out in the political campaign this year. We can talk about the Afghanistan debacle. The World Bank was deeply affected by that. We had 300 people in Kabul, many of whom didn't even have passports, as the U.S. pulled out abruptly from the protective base. And so that set in motion a series of events that we're still suffering from. I think also France, that I mentioned, has been weakening for years and simply not being a contributing positive factor to the world. And you see that across Asia, but also in the Paris Club and the inability of debt renegotiations. We heard someone mention the problem of Zambia and China's encroachment in Zambia. Those difficulties with the debt restructurings are going on day by day. Just yesterday, I think Ethiopia creditor committee launched. This is the first effort by the G20 to actually have the common framework begin operation. And unfortunately, China stepped in right at the beginning and said that there has to be debt forgiveness by the multilateral development banks. That's been their calling card for years now to stall the renegotiation of debt across the developing world. And people have followed closely the problems in Sri Lanka of that, but it extends worldwide. Suriname, Zambia, Ghana, and now Ethiopia, all under the thumb of a debt burden that's unsustainable. So this goes to global institutions. The common framework is the G20, and many here are familiar with APEC and with ASEAN, but as we look at the umbrella organizations for the world, the G20 has been practically dysfunctional over these years and continues to be, and yet dominates the agenda in a way that ends up in its decisions being highly pro-China, anti-markets, and I think that's one of the problems. One of the thrusts is to create the multilateral development banks as if they are an entity with similar characteristics. The problem with that is many of the multilateral development banks simply are not market-based institutions. AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank based in Beijing, is flowing money from China into developing countries in non-market ways. The New Development Bank based in Shanghai, similarly. And so as a group entity, this is simply an unworkable concept, and yet is heavily pushed by the globalist and elitist community. So it's important, the breakdown going on in France, because of its central role in those organizations. And so we'll see where, if there can emerge from that a more pro-market constituency in the world for international organizations. So groups like this one should think about this evolution of history that I've talked about, the PEC, the Pacific Economic Cooperation, that became the APEC or morphed into a joint government-private sector relationship, but then somehow we lost it over the decades in a way that's not working. The trade system, as you know, the global trading system is in full breakdown, and part of that is it was not set up. This is the WTO and the other elements of even going way back, the Generalized Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT rounds were set up on the presumption that the participants would want market-based solutions. But now we have the strong second economy in the world not looking for market-based solutions. So that means a full stop to the ability of using these techniques, the historical old models, in the world that we're in now. So I think we end up needing a full upheaval in many of the principles that are underpinning us now. One is development, and I've written a lot about that. Development has to be based on, well, let me come back to that, because I did have a chance to talk with a Malaysian participant here today. Sound money is going to be a theme of that, but we need an upheaval in development, we need an upheaval in trade, we need an upheaval in global institutions, and of course within the US, you see the upheavals needed in the way our government functions in order to be more efficient. We need to have an upheaval in how the world is thinking about this incredibly high cost of climate costs and the promises being made by the advanced nations with no intention at all of fulfilling those promises. So you've got a hypocritical underpinning to global institutions that I think needs to be really sorted out. The international financial institutions, that's the IMF, the World Bank, and the other multilateral development banks, are themselves making promises that aren't met. For example, the World Bank, I left the World Bank in June of 2023. The financial commitments from the World Bank have gone down since then. They were smaller in FY24 than in FY23 because of the constraints on that institution. So while there's talk about the IFIs in some way being a participant within the growth of development, they aren't designed to do that and aren't actually going to be fulfilling that role. So these are all challenges as we think about which way we're going forward. Let me mention two specifics and then to see if there are any questions. One is on the currencies. I mentioned that. So as we think about where growth comes from around the world, we've got this big problem of the payment systems not interlinking and the currency systems that have historically been dominated by the dollar breaking down through the sanctions process and through the end rounds that's coming through various crypto financing. But I wanted to remind people how vitally important currencies are to the nature of finance worldwide. I mentioned Malaysia. So remember the Asia crisis in 1997 and 1998. That was a deeply traumatic, weakening moment for most of Southeast Asia. But standouts in terms of that was Hong Kong maintained its currency board and maintained its giant wealth until China's takeover. But China, learning from that experience, also maintained its currency, and that gave impetus to its growth through the 1990s, through the 2000s. Malaysia notably stabilized itself in 1998 through a completely currency stabilization program that worked and set Malaysia apart. So if you look at the per capita incomes across Southeast Asia, the distinguishing factor was that moment in 1998 when Malaysia stabilized. It did much better than Thailand, than Indonesia, than South Korea. Only Hong Kong did better than Malaysia, and that's persisted to this day. The reason I say that is, as we think about the, global institutions, I think, and I worked at the World Bank to try to have more focus on money for people, because that's how they do private sector movement. So we have today this complete breakdown of economies in Africa because of the lack of usable currencies in Nigeria, in Ethiopia, in Egypt, even in South Africa, in Kenya, and that remains a huge risk. The world's solution to that is to treat it as a liquidity crisis, meaning a very short-term crisis, when in reality there is a solvency crisis for much of the world, in part because the US is drawing so much resources from the rest of the world to fund our fiscal deficit. So I wanted to kind of lay that out for people, that in my view, we've got a global system that is simply not working in a number of areas. It needs an upheaval. There's been a complete absence of initiative and leadership by the world community to move on any of the topics that I've mentioned. There's no movement for currency stability, no movement for debt restructurings, no movement for trade reorganization, no movement for rethinking the international financial institutions in terms of their limited role within development, and no movement, as many people know, on the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has undermined the food and fertilizer systems of the world. So with that, I wanted to give lay out the problem. The U.S. has has almost lost its soft power within the world. There's, up until the election, been no pathway that would rebuild that soft power. And so now we're starting fresh with a new administration here, likely new administrations throughout the G7, all but Italy. So of the leaders that I met with at the Hiroshima G7 summit in 2023, in May 2023, 6 of the 7 will be gone. That's Biden and Trudeau and so on, and only Meloni of Italy will remain. So you've got an opportunity for strong leadership from the U.S. in rebuilding a soft power for the U.S. that will benefit the world through these various systems. Stop there, see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You covered a lot of ground.
I did.